I've seen incredible shifts in teams' perception of a leader as they move forward and their desire to follow that leader because of the one sport that I really enjoy watching is the European Premier League football. My team is Arsenal, and they beat Chelsea. Good. But it was interesting listening to Frank Lampard, who's a former player now, talk about Chelsea and saying that, look,
I started thinking about the last 2 or 3 years and the amount of change that's been going on in the world, in business related to the pandemic, like the economy, all those kind of things. Are there any things that you've seen that were brand new during that time?
It's a really, really interesting question.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to this. I'm your host, Shauna Griffiths. And today's Real Talk is with an incredible real leader who is working to create transformation in the digital world. So Michael Leckie, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I'm so excited to know you and to talk about the amazing work you're doing.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation and from what I saw ahead of time, some interesting questions you have to dig into should be kind of, fun and meaty. So absolutely looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So folks, I always tell you how I know our guest. And so Michael is an author, a speaker, an executive coach. He's also a consultant for changeforce.ai. So you all have been seeing or hearing me post and talk about Changeforce. Really excited to be a part of their new consulting arm. As you've heard or seen, we've had the two co-founders, George Swisher and Nabil Ahmed, on the show. Most recently, we've had Bob Gower, and so now it's our honor to have you, Michael, on the show. Again, folks, the whole thing with what we're doing with changeforce.ai and the consulting arm is really helping leaders like you all be able to spot blind spots, problems before they happen, and create those solutions to be able to put the action in place so that you can deliver on what you need to for your clients, for your business, and really achieve those goals. So that is how I came to know Michael. And so, Mike, I would love for you to share, what is your area of focus as a changeforce.ai consultant so that the audience knows how to think about the work that you're doing through that platform?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the simple words that spring to mind for everyone is the digital transformation, but I start to wonder if that phrase has ceased to mean anything anymore because, it's transformation everywhere and everything's becoming digital. But really what I focus on in digital transformation is building change as an organizational capability. So we look at it as something that is a part of how an organization functions, not something episodic or that's happening just, at a point in time or a project. So how does building change as a capability in your organization allow it to change and transform and continue to change and transform so those things become continuous, but maybe, even smaller in their disruption and larger in their impact?
Yeah, that's a great point. So can you talk a bit further about how does that actually manifest itself, those pain points that you're seeing in the seat of leadership around change and that transformation? So, again, I want the audience to be able to really hear what you're saying and like identify, oh, I'm going through that as well. So, and which I think I told you earlier, like, I've been through this many times in a seat of leadership at an organization, and it's like just like quick change. But to your point, it's like at one moment in time and wanting the change to happen overnight. So that's how I think of it. But I really want people in the audience to be able to hear this. Like, this is a solution for some of these pain points that we're having.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, and I think the pain points originally started when we started talking change, because we put in, a lot of it was technology driven. We put in, big new systems or ways of working and business processes, operating models, and then people were resistant, right, to the change. And so we had to have change management to deal with resistance. And as a friend of mine says, he goes, resistance is generally just the engagement in change that we mistake because people aren't saying it exactly the way we are and we think it's resistance. But I think that the pain point that leaders find themselves in is that they've been sold a bill of goods on what change is all about, or transformation in an organization. They've been sold a bill of goods that says, once again, as we started, it's a project or a point in time or something episodic. We have to manage the change from A to B, from here to there, from now to this point in the future. as opposed to understanding how they have to lead an organization that can identify and embrace all kind of the micro changes that have to happen that lead to transformation. And they also have to address their very, very visible and participative role in that. So the pain points for most of those leaders is they're being asked to deliver on something that requires people to behave in a different way, and they're really frustrated because people aren't behaving in a different way. They're finding a way to behave in very much the same way they always have and go around the systems or processes or tools that have been put in place. And so there's a lot of money wasted, a lot of time wasted, and a lot of the things that they wanted to get out of implementing those tools or systems or processes or models in the first place that they're just not realizing, but they've already made some promises to. So they've kind of written the change promise check, and nobody's able to cash it because the organization doesn't want to, and that's where they really get stuck. And it's at that point when I have leaders, and oftentimes, and it would well, not too much disrespect to my colleagues in larger consulting organizations, it's after those groups have come in and built a big program with a bunch of communication and propaganda that they say this is going to do it, and nobody cares and nobody listens, nobody pays attention. They've billed, they've left, there's dusty binders, there's posters on the wall, there's coasters and screensavers, but nothing's really changed. That's the point usually where they call and say, okay, all that stuff that we paid a lot of money for didn't work. What do we do now? And that's where you have to start rethinking the change paradigm and how they even approach it, I guess, if that answers the question.
Yeah, it does, definitely. And I'm really glad you brought that up because that does happen a lot. I think that's part of the stigma, air quotes, that a lot of consultants have is this very complex plan strategy for how to implement something. And then, but a lot of times people get it and they're like, what the hell am I supposed to do with this? And I don't know how to action it. And it's not, so so talk about that work that you then do. Like, how do you unlock that? Not to ask you to give the the sort of secret sauce away, but is it related to, like, again, I think you said earlier, like the communication? Is it simplifying? What are the ways that you actually do approach it in a different way to unlock a different reaction and set of behaviors?
Yeah. It actually is very straightforward. I'm glad to give the secret sauce because it's still kind of difficult to apply. But that is that change is a dialogic process. The things that somebody said to me once, if you want to understand an organization, just simply look at who talks to whom about what. I think that was Gervais Bush said that in some form or another. But if you look at an organization, you see where the conversations are happening and what the conversations are happening about and what kind of information is or isn't in them. Then you know exactly how an organization works, where the information flows, where the power is, where the decisions are made, where things get stuck, where things get moved forward. So what we do is we don't really mess around with the systems or process or operating model side of change other than to have it be the context we're working in. And what we work on is what are the conversations that need to be happening. And the easiest way to change beliefs, which is what we're trying to do in a sense, which is incredibly difficult, is to get people to believe that doing something a different way is better. When the old way has worked for them, they've developed that way of working. It's been safe. It's kept them in their job. It's made them successful. It's had all sorts of things. We're saying, here's a different way. And they can't quite see the proof that that's going to work. And so we start, though, oftentimes by saying, here's our new beliefs. And then nobody believes the new beliefs. They believe the ones they have. But if we can articulate some behaviors, changing behaviors that cause you to question your beliefs can start to make a shift. And so we just simply introduce behaviors in the form of some really good questions, and then how to ask those questions and making sure they're being asked and answered and creating an ongoing dialogue. And we do that we can certainly get into details later, but in pockets and parts where there's coalitions of the willing, where there's groups that are already there. We don't try and do it systemically. We do it in the right places and let that kind of build some momentum and success. So people say, hey, they're doing something over there that's actually getting the results that we want and we're not getting. So we really approach it from that conversational, that the new behavior is the new conversations we're having. And it sounds overly simplistic, but getting organizations to change their conversation is a challenge and requires just a lot of in context working with them and introducing them to it and getting them used to talking and thinking in a different way. But once it does happen, then things can start to really move quickly.
Right. And you mentioned that there are a lot of times people will hold on to ways of doing things, behaviors, because it's the way they've done it before and it's worked. I've often found people that they still want to hold on to things and ways of behaving even when it hasn't worked. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts about that dynamic? Is it about, sometimes I think it's about just fear of change.
Well, I think it can be, but there's a couple of things that are happening there. And one is I use this phrase and I say this is one of my most consultantly sounding like phrases, but it's when I say to someone, look, it's not that what you're doing is wrong, it's just no longer right. And I believe it's a huge
Mm,
distinction because most of the choices that we're making about the way we're working and the behaviors in the workplace were made because they did work to some extent. Maybe not the greatest or fullest extent, but they did
mhm,
work. And they were probably decent and right enough changes at the choices at the time. But then the world shifts around you and you keep sticking with that same choice. And so I think getting people to realize that what was right yesterday may not be so right today is one of the first things we have to do.
mhm.
And then a second one is, and this is endemic in our workplace, as far as my experience has been, is our desire and our need because of our, I don't know if it's our performance systems or what we do, but to equate ourselves with our ideas. Like
Oh,
I
yeah.
have a lot of ideas and I've had a lot of ideas throughout my life. And some of them are ideas I've completely abandoned. And some of them I have right now that I hold dear, I probably will abandon as well. But the fact of the matter is that we tend to put our ideas out there and then we identify with them. If someone rejects our idea in an organizational setting, we feel like they're rejecting us, and that's
Right.
frightening. Or to your point of being afraid, it's damaging to us if we are vulnerable, if we are not right. We have this belief unless we're right about everything and putting forward the best ideas that we're in danger in an organization, and so we fight for ideas even if they're wrong or no longer right because they were ours. And so if we can step away and realize that I am not my beliefs and be able to put arguments, discussions, concepts out there and really not care if we get a yes or a no or a maybe, as long as it moves us forward, we're going to make great progress. If we're going to have to stick and fight for those things, then it basically just becomes an organization driven by the ideas, good or bad, of whoever has the most power at the moment. And that's not a real
Mm.
great recipe for success or for change at all.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. So, as you were talking, I was thinking about kind of another factor in the challenges that present themselves as pain points in change and transformation is literally time and pace. And I know you talk about that quite a bit. And I really want to bring it to the forefront because I think that there is this almost call it a conundrum or duality that happens where people like oftentimes leaders want the change to happen. They say they want the change to happen. We'll get back to that later. They say they want the change to happen and they want and they expect that it can happen overnight
Yeah.
and or very quickly. I'm exaggerating when I say overnight. Um and there it is such a complex process as you've mentioned. So but again, I think there's this expectation that it's going to happen so quickly. So can you bring some reality to or some conversation to both the pace, that conundrum, and some reality around timing of change?
Yeah, boy, it's a great question because deeper change, changing a culture, changing the kind of the center of gravity of beliefs in an organization certainly can take time. Um, the problem is that most of the time we set it up for this long time horizon as the project planned, and we don't ever really think we're going to get to it, and we don't. And it can
Mm.
happen a little bit quicker, but it happens individually. Change is a game, is an individual game played in pairs in small groups that can eventually affect an organization systemically. We oftentimes approach it systemically with a bunch of propaganda and information and news and statements that doesn't really take us anywhere quickly. And so I've been a guy who's kind of tried to steadfastly avoid sports analogies for most of my consulting career, but I was thinking that the one sport that I really enjoy watching is the European Premier League football,
Oh,
and my team is Arsenal, and they're playing Chelsea the other day, and they beat Chelsea. Woohoo, good. But it
Woohoo.
was interesting listening to Frank Lampard, who's a former player now, talk about Chelsea and saying that, look, we're just not ready and our fitness levels aren't there. And I think that, I mean, because they've got a team of stars, I mean, some incredibly talented people. But with all the stuff that's gone on, I would say the distraction of their management, changes in management, all of this stuff happening, they've not really known where to go. And they've just taken the gas off a little bit and sat back and waited. And when you're doing that, you're not building your fitness. Well, I think that organizations tend to say, we're going to do all this work at the top, figure out all these brilliant strategic things, and then let's go boom and throw it on people. And they're going to be ready to start the race and run full out, but they haven't been training. And so one of the approaches I take is, look, you need to build that change muscle. And so
Mm.
when the change thing, whatever it is, hits, you've got, what you're trying to do is happening at this level of the strategy or the goal, but that breaks down into thousands of little sub strategies and goals that have to support that. Those have to be discussed, sussed out, choices made, experiments tried, movement, gone forward or whatever in very, very small ways all across the organization. That means all kind of the athletes have to be out there running with it in their own way and saying, how am I going to accomplish this goal down here? So if you've built that change muscle and if you have a mechanism to keep building it in the context of the work, then the team can start really getting some things done and moving forward. But we too often just let them sit there getting kind of, change flabby, if you will, and then all of a sudden demand run and go with it. And nobody knows really how to do it, or it's exhausting, or they're, getting hurt or injured or running into things. And that's what slows it all down and it doesn't
Yeah.
go anywhere. So, for me, I guess bottom line is that if you're not building the change muscle, it's not going to happen quickly when you want it to happen. And if you are, it can actually happen a lot more quickly than you think.
Yeah, those are great points. Thank you so much for sharing that. Um, I actually started, as you were saying, I started thinking about the last two, I guess, 2 or 3 years and the amount of change that's been going on in the world, in
Mm-hmm.
business related to the pandemic, like the economy, all those kind of things. Are there any things that you've seen that like were brand new during that time related to change? Were you seeing any trends in how people were, brands were, leaders were operating? Was there anything that really stands out to you about just this massive, continuum of change that we've gone through in the last few years?
It's a really, really interesting question. And while it doesn't leap to mind, the thing that comes to mind was conversations. I work with a business partner, a guy named Mark Bowden, and people may know him from the Behavior Panel on YouTube and other things that he's done, or film and TV. But we worked together, and we were working once with a group of people who are all executive coaches. And we were talking to them, and at one point, and this person was very, very experienced. They were, a C-suite officer of a major corporation, had, paid a lot of dues, learned a lot, been very successful too, very bright person. And we were talking to them about how you're creating a space to ask questions to get people to figure things out. And at one point, he said, "Yeah, but when can I just tell them what to do?" And we talked through all the reasons why when you tell someone what to do, it's not near as effective as when they figure it out on their own. But at one point, Mark said, he goes, "Well, there is one point in which you can tell them what to do and they'll pretty much do it." And he said, "Oh, great. When's that?" He said, "It's when they're desperate." And
Oh,
so, and they've got nowhere else to turn. And so I think one of the things we saw during the pandemic is some of the change I think that happened, whether it was, ways of working,
oh yeah.
particularly, the hybrid or working from home. They were desperate because they had to keep a
Mhm.
company going, but they couldn't have people in an office. I mean, that was the leaders had never been faced with, keep your company going, nobody comes to work. What? And if you
Yeah.
told them that in theory and done an exercise like in an offsite, they would have just been irritated and said, this is just dumb. And then it happened like that overnight. So I think that one of the things that the pandemic showed us is that when we're forced into change, we can certainly make it happen. So what that tells me is not great. Let's find ways to overwhelmingly force change. What it tells me is that we are change capable when we have to be, and that we
Mm.
have not built the necessary requirements or impetus for it, understanding of the need for it in our organizations. We have organizations that are centered around stability, keeping things going, keeping things equitable, keeping things the same. There's a lot of value in that. but also we become to over rely on it. And so I think that one of the things it has taught us is that, boy, when we get desperate, we can make some changes. And so how about if we can find a place between complacent and desperate that just is involved in and open to change, that allows us to move forward as a part of who we are as an organization, as opposed to waiting till our hand is forced.
Yeah, yeah. I love your analogy of the muscle, training the muscle, because I think that the more we keep that muscle trained, it's not saying you want to try like all of a sudden, always be upsetting the apple cart and force the change all the time. But again, like it's almost like as you were saying that, it made me think that part of what you're getting at is that you're staying adaptable. You're able to, change over time, consider change. It's almost like you're practicing it so that when you do need to do it, you're more adept at it.
It's exactly. It was funny. In prepping for this and thinking it through, I'd pulled up, and we've talked a little bit at the beginning about changeforce.ai and working with George and Nabil and the team there. And when I wrote my book, here's shameless
Oh yeah.
plug. When I wrote my book,
The Heart of Transformation, for those who are listening on as a podcast, The Heart of Transformation. Here you go. Love
um,
it.
but what I did is I basically said, look, I've talked about using questions as behaviors, right? So I came up with then kind of 30 questions, 31 actually. There's a bonus there under 6 different categories of change capability that will help spur that capability forward. They're the questions that are the behaviors that reflect that. But what I did with that work then after I was done writing the book is kind of went through and said, well, what is each of these all about? And so I was kind of looking at the list here, and I've given them all, names actually as I put them early on working with the Change Force team, saying, okay, well, what is the driver here of change? Like failing fast, preparing for surprise, examining execution, actively humble, unlocking potential. And so I have a list of those, about 30 of them that I look at. And so look at and say in organizations, these are what the change muscles look like. And the process of building them is fairly simple, is identify, sounds simple at least, is identifying which of those muscles might be most useful next, and which of those are stronger and which are weaker, and what do we want to do about that? And one of the reasons that I ended up doing work with the Change Force team early on was because there was an ability to actually have some data around that. Otherwise, the work that I do and many people like I do, what people can I guess resist about it or doubt about it is very human. It's very human driven, and we're used to like spreadsheets and numbers and projects with things on the Gantt chart. And this is about no, we're just getting people to start having conversations using these questions, and it seems very effervescent, and it's like, oh, it's kind of, I don't
Ethereal.
know about that. Yeah, is there gonna be something of substance here, or is all just bubbles that's going to blow away? And so being able to identify those, but also then start to have some data and say, look, based on the conversations I'm seeing, if we talk about valuing vulnerability, that's being able to ask for help. I can have a human conversation with a limited amount of people and say, hey, do you ask for help? When's the last time you asked for help? And they'll tell me what they want to hear, what they think I need to hear, what's important to hear, what they think is the truth. But if we're actually looking at what's going on, are there conversations where people are asking for help a lot or very little? And we have a chance to know this might be an area that we need to focus on. And so it's really a matter of identifying, I am, trying to continue to, stay fit as I get older. I do a lot of isometric exercises, and I know, which ones target which muscle groups. And with my trainer, we can kind of balance that around so I can stay whole. I also know if I'm like, doing some particular sport, I want to go for a run, I'm going to spend more time working on this part of my muscles because that's what I'm going to need. And so I think really being able to chart out where are some of the places I need to build the strength and what does that look like? Basically, in a sense, trying to get organizations into a bit of a fitness routine around change as a capability is what we try and do to build that muscle.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. Thank you for that description. And I have to tell you, because of all my sports background, both working and my like playing and everything, I love your sports analogies. And my team is Man United, so I'll give you a
All right,
break.
well, as
But
long
I
as
was
you're not
happy
Tottenham, we can be okay. We're all
I know
right.
exactly. I was glad your guys beat Chelsea the other day, though. I'm with you. One thing that I know that you talk about that I'd love for you to share is the combination of truth and lies in change
Mm-hmm.
and transformation. So, can you bring some of that to life? Because, again, I think the listeners who are leaders in organizations, they battle that again, that's the truth and lies, I think. But I would love for you to go into it a bit more, so we can all hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually do a bit of a keynote on that one that I refer to as the Escape from the Emerald City, and I talk about the original Wizard of Oz, written back in 1900 or 1910, whatever it is. And when they go to the Emerald City for the first time, they're warned. They say, "Look, the city is so dazzling, of this made of emeralds, that you have to put these special glasses on to make sure that you don't, harm your eyes as you walk in." They say, put them on, lock them on your head so you're safe, and you walk in. It's just this dazzling green emerald city. Well, of course, you figure out later it's not. It's a normal city. You're just wearing green glasses. And I kind of joke that that's how we've approached change, because we've come up with these sayings or maxims or thoughts about change and transformation that we just believe. And they've been promulgated and repeated by all sorts of organizations, large and small, as they're putting together charts and PowerPoints when they're selling you a big, a big systems implementation. But it's just there's just some myths out there, like myths around change being a systemic process. That's something that starts from the top, driven by a big vision, a bunch of information flowing down like a beautiful cleansing rain to the thirsty people below. It's like bullshit. It's not. It's something that has to happen by people building those muscles. And so
Yeah.
one of the first things that I'll often do with my clients is we will have the even larger sessions to talk about that, but then workshops. But we'll really start to explore what are kind of I refer to them as the 7 myths of change, and how are they showing up in this organization? Are those myths showing up here? Why do we believe them? What makes us think they're true? What are the alternatives? Can we look for something? So we really start with some myth busting work and the truth or lies side to it. And then it leads us into looking at kind of the questions of change as well, because we go forward and we think that we can change what we're doing, but we're measuring all the same things. Our systems, our processes around us don't shift at all. I mean, it's one of the when I was at Gartner, there was a fascinating piece of research done by my colleague Chris Howard, chief of research there, is a brilliant guy, and they went out and he talked to a tremendous amount of CEOs and said, how many of you are involved in some sort of digital transformation project that's going to be from medium to massive implication? It was like over 90%. Great. How many of you are changing your financial metrics and reporting to reflect that? Single digits, that hadn't even thought about it. And so we're trying to do something brand new and measure it the same way. And so, one of the lies around change is that it doesn't require change. We want it isolated in this little spot here where people just like it and adapt, but everything else stays the same for our stability and our comfort. And that's not the way it works. Something starts changing, it affects everything, and you have to be open to and willing to look at that, if that is helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And you've mentioned a couple times through our conversation, and the element of a lot of time is that top down, like people in these leaderships up top or seats up top are creating all of this and they're going to push it down. And so that is very much a way that I've experienced it happening, which is I've found very problematic. And so what are your thoughts about involving, like, that's what you mean about systemic, I think, is like when you're evolving staff in the process? And is that something that you are a proponent of, that all staff are a part of developing the change or developing the protocols, or how do you, what's that dynamic?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Really good question getting into, because you do have to have something you're trying to achieve, right? You're not just going out and saying, we want to change, and then people say, okay, and what? So we have a goal, we have something strategic we're trying to accomplish. I think that is the role of leadership, to identify, articulate, and really sell a compelling direction we're moving in. The problem is then getting it into action, because that takes such individual form. So let's say our conversation is, I say, hey, you know what? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to change how we dress. And I tell you that, Shauna, I want you to change how you dress. Great. What do you want me to do different? Well, we want to be more ready for the elements. I want you to wear more kind of sports, things that kind of, resist the rain and stuff. Okay. It's going to be hot today. Okay. Well, you don't have to wear that one today. Well, what about, my colors? Well, what about, you got all your questions. And by the time we're done, redressing you. It's taken all of our time and I'm just frustrated, but like, can't you just get what we're trying to do? But that's how we kind of handle change. We start with a general statement, tell people to do something different. They have all these questions, but we've created this vacuum in that all those questions have to go back up to that one choke point who can't or won't or doesn't know how to answer them all. So what we have to do is say, here's the change we need to make. We need to dress differently because here's where we're going to be going. And we believe this has a real implication for how we dress. Great. Now let's have the conversations happen at the right levels in the different areas and parts of the country and parts of the year so people can figure that out. And I know it's a silly example, but I use it just to illustrate
No.
that there's a lot of discussion that has to happen. And we need to trust people then to dress appropriately for where it is we're going. So we have to tell them where we're going. We have to let them know what it's going to be like. We have to know why it's good to go there. But then we have to leave them to have the conversations about how they get there. And the only way it needs to come back up to us is as we start to learn and see some patterns. Not so we can say, now here's a new best practice to shove on everybody else, but we can say, this is how they solved it. These are the questions they asked. This is what they went through. What do you think of that? What would you do with those questions? How would you handle it? And so again, turning that sovereignty for the details of the change over to the people, taking the overall direction is something that as a leadership team, you should be able to set and sell, in an effective way. If your change is a really dumb one, you're probably not going to win hearts and minds. But for the most part, you have intelligent people making decisions. They just have to remember that once they've made the decision in that direction and people have embraced it, then they have to let go and support them to enact it, not try and manage the inaction of it.
Got it. Got it. And so I've experienced times when I've been a part of a leadership team and there may be person who's the number one person at the company, the
Mhm.
the top leader. And I've had experiences where the person says they want change, but I've often thought or even said, are do you actually want that change? Are you ready for what that change means?
Yeah.
So if and I think that that's prevalent. And so especially when, you have things like whether you're talking in the DEI space, again, I'm thinking through what we've gone through over the past several years and people, I want to be diverse and I want to be inclusive, but then are they actually willing to do the things to get us there? So
Yeah.
if there's other people in the audience who are in a seat like that as well, do you have any recommendations or things that you could, I guess, again, just recommend for either ways to think about it or ways to handle those situations?
Handle a situation. Yeah. It is one of those things that if you have a leader that sees themselves as aloof, stand apart, or exempt from change, you're probably not going to get much change. Can you work around them to a degree, but only to a degree. I believe it's either Edgar Schein or Peter Block who talk about going into a client and saying, look, part of their social contract with the new client is ask 3 questions. Great, you've got this problem you want me to solve. Do you want me to go ahead and dig in and take a look and see if I can figure out what the problem is? And they're like, yeah, that's why I'm hiring you. Okay. Do you want me to tell you what I find if I think I figure out what the problem is? Yeah, that's why we're hiring you. Great. Are you okay when I tell you if you're a part of the problem? And if the
Ah,
third question can't be answered positively, they don't take the work. And so, what leaders have to realize is that more and more and more they are just implicated in the change, even if from the perspective of even if the way they're approaching it, their mindset, their way of doing it is great, right on target. They've got to. I'm working right now with a big hospital system that we're taking from the phrase from my book, and we're calling their program "Leading Out Loud." And what we're doing is making sure that their leaders across the system are very open about their own change experiences, processes, and stories. That they are very humble about that they are vulnerable, that they are willing to say, I think I'm wrong and I'm going to change my mind on that, and I support that they're doing all the things they need to do to create the psychological safety for people to ask questions and challenge, in a great respectful way. But
yeah.
a leader that's not willing to be wrong will never be told when they're wrong. And I worked for a phenomenal leader, is passed away since, named Ron Oberlander, who was the CEO of at the time the world's biggest newsprint company, Abitibi Price. And Ron would say, anybody can tell me I'm full of shit at any time they want to. You better have a good reason. You better have a good argument. You better have a cogent case. But anyone can tell me. And if they are right, I will correct myself. And
Huh.
he got challenged on something in front of a company wide meeting and he stopped, paused, he goes, as painful as it is, I see what you're saying. And I think you're absolutely right. And we're going to change direction on that. And he would just do it. And
Wow.
people couldn't believe the experience of that. Now, he was an incredibly successful leader, incredible financial success for the firm, turned it around and left a huge legacy. But he was confident enough to have that humility and vulnerability, but he set a tone with all the rest of his leaders. And so real conversations happened. And when a real conversation happens, real work gets done. You look at Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy's work, like around in Everyone Culture, great book. They talk about the amount of time that we spend hiding in organizations, hiding
Oh,
our fears of incompetence
yeah.
or how we're being seen as imperfect, as opposed to just having the conversations that help us get better. We pretend we're better and stay sick because it feels safer than showing where we have places to grow and then going through the pain of that growth in front of others. But the organizations that do that invariably do much, much better than the organizations that don't.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that example that you gave about the guy who says, oh, you know what? You're right. And I'm going to make that. I mean, if you really think about it, the degree of humanity that he showed in that moment for people. And, I think that it's oftentimes, I think that has a positive impact in the ability for people to call it air quotes, follow a leader who is human,
Yeah,
who who has that ability. And I love the part that you said also that like change isn't when you're going through change or you're embarking on that as a leader, especially it's good for the leadership team to think about, this is not just change in processes and where you're putting dots and figures and documents, but it truly is about embracing that ability, your own capability of change. And because it requires change of the people, especially people in leadership seats.
yeah, it does. It's fascinating to watch leaders. My work is interesting. It's evolved, and I would say that it's funny. It's actually harder now to sell to clients what I do the most because of the leap into the level of conversation we get into. Because the clients that I work with that are making tremendous change, the kind of the phrase we use is going from being a great to a transformative leader. A
Mm.
transformative leader, someone who can lead transformation, is a deeply human person. They're a
Yeah.
person that is in touch with themselves, their hopes, their dreams, their needs, their wants, their motivations. They have a safe space, and usually that's the role that I play, is a safe space. But I talk to my clients every week.
Mm.
We get together. I'm more or less on call for them. We get together, 3 or 4 times a year at minimum, just in person, just to kind of talk through them, where they're going, what they're learning, how they're growing. They spend a lot of time on themselves, which is not
Mm.
in vogue in most organizations. It's like, I'm up here, you're paying me, this, 7 or 8 figure salary. I should be at the top of my game, but you're at the hardest point. Some of them,
Yeah.
I mean, I literally have clients who have hundreds of thousands of employees that they're responsible for. The lives that they touch are huge. The responsibilities are enormous. And so they need that time to really focus in who they are as a leader and who they are as a person who can identify and embrace their own
Hmm.
change. But I can tell you, most people who come for coaching are looking for something, a little bit more at a distance, a little bit, a ways off. Let's talk, but I want to ease my way into it as opposed to dive right into the deep end.
Yeah.
And those who are ready, though, to like dive in,
Yeah.
then we start to make some amazingly rapid progress. And they kind of wake up and say, what happened? I mean, what
Yeah.
happened to me? I changed and shifted so much. And at the same time, watching their teams, their team is always paying attention. And
Oh
I've
yeah.
seen incredible shifts in teams' perception of a leader as they
Mhm.
move forward and their desire to follow that leader because of the humanity and engagement and openness and vulnerability they're showing that reflects such strength and leadership to their people. So it's really interesting. But the bottom line is, I guess, to start with your question, the leaders who aren't willing to get in and lead actively and go through the challenge, the difficulty, and the pain of their own growth are the ones who are holding their organizations back. And we really need to figure out, what do we do something with, because they can cost an organization on so many levels. It's scary.
Yeah, I love that you said that because there's been a mantra I've had out in front of myself of the past several years and I communicated a lot in what I write and talk about is the ability to get out of our own way and that leaning into evolving as leaders, as humans. And you're totally spot on what you just said about like we're literally need to get out of our own way, get out of the way of the change that we're trying to actually facilitate. And um, another thing is I'm sure you can, well, I don't know, I'm interested to hear what you think about this as a coach, because through my own coaching that I do with people, I often talk about the fact that people come to coaching when they're ready. And the degree to which they step into that coaching also is when they're ready. So they may want to tiptoe in or they may want to jump in, but the impact of that you can make really depends on where the individual is in their journey.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's very true. That's very true. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, again, I say that because I think we're talking about people, humans who are in these seats of leaderships. And so it does translate completely to the change that you're trying to implement at the organizations. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah. So we're wrapping up here. Again, I want to just be very considerate of your time. But you talked a bit about earlier about your book, and I'm curious. Again, it's called The Heart of Transformation, folks. I haven't gotten it yet. Plug. He's going to show it on the screen. I haven't read it yet, but it's on my list. But I'm curious, like what actually led you? What got you to the point where you're like, I need to write a book about this?
Oh, great question. Like, as I began to examine, I stepped back. I'm going to go back about 20 years now, probably. Geez, that far, maybe 15 or so. And I was having a conversation with a gentleman named Rod Wagner. And Rod's gone on to write some great books and write and speak. But he was a Gallup research scientist and consultant at the time. And he talked about, and I don't know if he was supposed to, but he talked about, so, one of the things that we do when we're interviewing people in the consulting group is we'll ask them, what's your mission? And we are looking for someone who has a response that's very quick and very clear. And people who aren't clear on that, it's a bit of a flag for us, because we've found that in our practice, people who know why they're there, know what they're all about, are the ones that are the most effective. And I remember him asking me that question. And I said, to make the world a better place to live and work, one organization at a time. And over time, I began to feel a little bit constrained by the one organization at a time piece. And so I thought, okay,
Mm,
I have limited amount of people I can work with, limited amount of clients that I can work with directly, just given the physical time I have on the planet. And so I
mm,
thought, well, can I pull together enough of what I've learned to let people leverage it and get value on it? Not because of what I have to say is something brand new or groundbreaking, because I think some of it's been said before and some of it's been said maybe in better ways. But I wanted to make it sayable in a really accessible way and break it down
mhm,
to the smallest actionable component. And that was just being able to simply open up and say, look, here's the questions, right? Here's the questions that you have in this area. So comes to learning before knowing. Who challenges my beliefs? How is my idea wrong? What is my blind spot? And talk
mm,
about how can you take questions like that? How do you use them? And I actually go into detail in the book. You can get downloads that help you ask a question as a whole canvas based on lean canvas methodology that helps you understand how to ask a question. But I really wanted to bring it down to something actionable that anyone at any level could do. And what's been interesting is that my book is a book, I would say, that is generally targeted towards leaders and managers. Although there's a lot of people that just aspire to that or interested in leadership that read it as well. But it's not a 50 ways in 50 days type of book that's going to sell
yeah,
to everybody in an airport stand. It's not academic, but it's a practical organizational change book. But I found that as my work practice, stays the same, which is I have, I can afford a small number of senior executives that I work very intensely with, and that's about it. That my kind of like my online work, we talked about some of that earlier, is more and more and more just giving away the ideas and the questions and the things that we learn, because I know that when I'm, just sharing with someone, either over a podcast like this or through things through my website, that there's stuff they can download and try and work on their own, and that can be great. I also know that the challenges of my most senior leaders, they're so working so hard, so stressed, so harried, that they need me to pull them into that place where we
Mm.
force them to apply these things in context so they keep it going. They require, they're, I guess it's, going back to our analogy, anybody can read the book and, kick the ball and make some passes a little bit better. But, when I do my work, I'm working with the elite athletes, if you will, but
Mm.
I'd like to be able to take what we can learn from that and share it with others. And that was the impetus behind the book and behind the stuff that we continue to do online that we just distribute, for free on my YouTube channel and on LinkedIn, so people can benefit from it there, hopefully.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I mentioned it because I really do. Part of what I like to do through this podcast and the platform is to provide resources, and to provide resources for leaders, up and coming leaders, to help themselves. And then, they have the ability, obviously, to take it further as they want to. But so I end every podcast episode by asking, because we cover so many different things, and I just want to make sure that if there's one or two takeaways that you really want to make sure that you leave the audience with today, that you're able to share that. So again, I just ask you now, if there's one or two takeaways that you want to make sure the audience has, what would that be?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the first one is ask for help. Always
Yeah.
ask for help. Learn, ask for help, and you know, don't feel like. I had a conversation with the late Clay Christensen a few years ago. Met through a good friend of mine, Bob Mesta, and Clay had been a hero of mine forever. And we were talking about digital transformation. We're sitting in a little room in in the Harvard campus. It was rainy outside and cold. It was January, I think, and we were talking. And all of a sudden, Clay stops and he says, Michael, I'm having an epiphany. It used to be that we had to develop the skills and the abilities to get the job. Now we're in the job. We need to develop the skills and abilities to go where the job is now going next. And this is as leaders.
Ah,
And we talked about how destabilizing that can be when your
mm,
legitimacy of being the job is you knew more than others, you'd done more than others, and now you no longer knew enough and you had
mm,
to learn. And our ongoing conversation, I talked to him. I said, what I find really kind of worrisome, Clay, is that most people respond to that with fear and they shut
mm,
it out. It's like, no, I can't admit that now I have to learn and grow, or else I'm not able to do this job. Otherwise, it threatens my position, my power, my stability, all the things I worked so hard to earn. That can't be true. I just got to shove it out of my mind and fight it. But there was a small percentage that said, this is great. I'm here because I'm the best person to be here because of what I've done, and I'm best positioned to go forward and change and learn more and move from a place of knowing to a place of learning where it's all about how
mhm.
fast can I learn and relearn something. But all of that requires help. Whether you're,
Yeah.
hiring a guy like me or reading my book or engaging in somebody else, really asking for help and asking, for understanding with change. And I think the second thing is to always remember that you can't change anyone or anything but you. All you can do is
Wow.
change your behaviors and the way you act and the way you respond to others. And we spend so much time in a change space trying to change others, as opposed to changing ourselves. And so it's like when I'm using the ChangeForce AI tool. What I love is it surfaces these areas in which the change muscles aren't built. And the intervention I suggest then is not to go to the CEO and say, "Great, we're going to build this in your people." I can say, "Okay, so how are we going to build this in you? How are you
Ah,
going to role model this? How are you going
yeah.
to What language are you going to use to create a rallying cry around valuing vulnerability? How are you going to do that?
Mm,
Because that's the one that's going to land and stick. And so it's all about you. But it's a much more active role. And I think when senior leaders are face to face with the fact that I can't be here because I'm functionally the best at this anymore or content wise the best. I need to be here because I have the functional or content skills, but I need to be a change leader first. That's terrifying to many of them. But those who embrace it, the ones I've seen embrace it, it's amazing what they can do. I have a client right now that is doing some stunning things and revitalizing part of an industry that that is, I mean, has been moribund for a long time. And the changes he's driving are incredible, and they stem from his own personal changes and how his team has rallied behind that and embraced it and just skyrocketed and taken off. So ask for
Yeah.
help and be willing to change yourself, I guess, is the short-winded way of saying what was kind of long-winded there.
Oh no, it's awesome. I'm grinning because I truly believe in everything that you're saying. I think it's so great to hear you express it the way you do. Thank you so much for spending your time here today, for sharing all your wisdom. And I'm excited for all that we're going to be able to do together as part of the changeforce.ai consulting team.
Yeah, I am as well. And I'll say, just as to add on to that, I've worked with George and Nabil for many years, and kind of, as the product has grown. And it's interesting in that, I first got involved helping do some consulting because the product was so good, but the people using it were like, yeah, but I just need some thought behind this as well. And I think that, it's just been inevitable for a long time coming that they were going to draw on the ecosystem of people like yourself and others that they have met and said, let's just build something that integrates these two things together. And, for my clients to be able to do the change work we do, but also to have then the data to show where we're focusing and the impact it's having, and actually show shift in a culture and its mindset changing, is a bit groundbreaking. We've talked about it forever, but we've gotten it all from anecdotal evidence. And now for the first time, we're starting to have the capacity with AI and with, the data analysis to see this organization is changing in
Mm.
how we think and talk and behave, and our capabilities around change. And that's an exciting time to actually separate the wheat from the chaff on what change approaches actually make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, folks, you've heard it here. You're going to get all the links to everything that Michael has to offer. Michael, have an amazing day. Folks, have an awesome day. Thank you so much for tuning in.